First off, let's recognize our table sponsors today. We have EHRA Engineering, Atkins, and the Gary Fields. We thank y'all very much for sponsoring us here today. And then elected officials, we have Mr. Roger Shugart and Bill Lott, both from Brazoria, the big city of Brazoria. 3,000, how many people now? 3,200, all right. All right, very good. Joe Garcia, Mayor of the City of Patterson, welcome. Where are you at? He's sitting over here. Brian Rowland, uh-oh, I just lost power. No? Brian Rowland, Mayor, City of Prairie View. Thanks, sir. And then Board Commissioner Rob Gasecki. Thank you. Sorry. And then I'm Shane Pearl, also Board Commissioner. So Rob just came on this year, and so sometimes we just blank out.
Shane's he's a slow learner.
I won't touch it. I'll leave that alone. We also have Kendrick Jones, Commissioner of Waller County. Thanks, sir. Alex Chadwell and Mary Davis, representing the office of Congressman Troy Nails. They're here. Don't want to admit it. Did I miss anybody else that's elected official? Okay.
Tina Bakers, Meadows Place Alderman.
All right, thank you.
Go record Fort Bend County Treasurer.
Thank you, sir. And Roger, did you want to introduce Mike?
Yes. Brazoria City Manager Mike Collard, been with us about 15, 16 months.
Okay.
We've been working hard.
Good, good. I know where there's some drainage issues. All right. With that, Jim, did David have anything?
No, that's okay.
No, didn't want to talk. All right, very good. All right, I've been asked several times about what's going on at the port this morning, so I'm going to quickly try to address some of that. The leading question we have right now, and of course, if you watched what the governor said the other day, he made an announcement that Texas ports are open and available. We would like to have some of that business that's sitting offshore in LA Long Beach, waiting up to over 100 days now in some cases. There's over 150 ships is what I last saw sitting out there waiting. The challenges, if you've been in the business industry, are that all of those folks have contracts made. They have stevedores, shippers, supply chain, all set up and ready to go. They're kind of in an unknown area right now, a new world for them. They could possibly come around through the Panama Canal, which is also backing up. If you see what's going on there more and more, there's been issues with coming through the Panama Canal. We in Freeport have the availability to bring them in. We could handle more ships. We might have to start doing some shuffling because we can't handle 100 ships, but we could handle quite a few. Port Houston could handle some more, although if you see what's happening in Port Houston, they're staying very busy as well. But Gulf Coast as a whole could handle quite a few of those ships if they would bring them in. But like I said, they have supply chain plans, issues, things going on, and so whether they came across by rail, they're having trucking issues because they require, most of California requires union truckers, and so the independents are having a challenge getting in and bringing trucks. But as a whole, the United States is also having a problem with truckers, so that's an ongoing issue. As far as Port Freeport, we're in the process of building out berth 8. That should be finished somewhere first quarter of 2023 is the plan. We still need to buy a new crane, so we're going to have to make that decision before long. We're almost complete with the purchase of what is commonly been called the East End. We're down to the last few houses, going through court proceedings on those. And then we have to work with the city of Freeport to finish up what we're going to do with roads, utilities, things like that. But that will give us the capability of developing more backlands, bringing in a new truck handling facility there, and allow us to have a better working, functioning truck facility for Customs and Border Patrol to to inspect both incoming and outgoing. We have over 10,000 spots now for cars, because we have cars coming in from Korea, Japan, Mexico, probably a few other spots in the world. We're also then taking all the General Motors products from Arlington and shipping those out typically to Saudi Arabia and that general vicinity, as well as just about every used car that's everything from Dallas, San Antonio, wherever. It's amazing there's any used cars left in Brazoria County, but if you see those cars on the car haulers that look like they're just damaged, torn up, whatever, they're probably going to Freeport and going to West Africa or somewhere else across the globe. We have construction equipment, we have ambulances, all kinds of, if you can name it, if you've seen it working, some military equipment. And some of it comes and goes because there will be people buying on the global market overseas and bringing it in, or vice versa. We have cranes, Tadano cranes coming in, Mahindra tractors, Mahindra equipment. We are truly touching the globe in Fort Freeport. And as we're here to talk about, Highway 36 will help us with some of that. We have Tenaris steel. We brought in 30,000 tons, I believe, this last month of steel that goes to Bay City. It's going into oil wells somewhere. So I don't know what else, Mike. Did I miss something, Rob, that maybe you want to share with what's going on? So, okay, we're continuing to grow. The deepening and widening, we finished the first reach, deepening that. We're letting the contract on the second reach that will be going along pretty soon. So we will have the capability. We're working on more ships coming in, more product moving through the port. So we're not finished growing yet. So anybody have any loaded questions that I can let Mike answer? All right. Well, didn't want to take too long, but thankfully, and I appreciate it, everybody seems to be interested in the port. I know we're definitely proud of where we're at and what we've accomplished, and we're seeing great growth in Fort Freeport. So, Chuck, Craig tells me Chuck's running a little bit behind, so Craig may end up with the program here. That's okay, he can handle it, I'm sure. Craig is the Director of Transportation for the Houston Galveston Area Council. As Director of Transportation, Craig leads transportation planning efforts for the 8-county Houston Galveston Metropolitan Planning Area, which includes the counties of Brazoria, Chambers, Fort Bend, Galveston, Harris, Liberty, Montgomery, and Waller, and is home to 6.7 million residents and growing rapidly. He also helps guide the Transportation Policy Council, the region's transportation policy making body, to establish future investment priorities and projects that support sustainable growth, increased safety and mobility, enhanced economic vitality, and superior quality of life. Craig has more than 20 years of experience in regional transportation planning, land use planning, and climate and sustainability related planning. Please give Craig a welcome here. Hold this.
I think I'll try. So thanks for the introduction, and Chuck should be here any minute now. He and I had sort of worked out a tag team routine that we were going to go through, but since he's not here, I'll start out with part 2 of that. It won't be quite as compelling probably, but I just want to note, Shane just did about half of my comments with the bio, because I'm new here. A lot of people, y'all, I'm sure everyone in this room, knew Alan, my predecessor, very well. And you don't know me too well yet, so you'll have that opportunity, and I'll hang around afterwards if folks want to chat. I think what I'm supposed to be talking about is sort of the status and progress relating to 36A, the 2 36A projects that have been under consideration, basically from the end of the current 36 up to eventually to 290. And what I can tell you is both of those projects, and I also realize that you're all stakeholders in this, and so I suspect you all know exactly what I'm about to say. I'm just gonna maybe use some different words to say it, but so both of those projects were included and recommended or approved by our Transportation Policy Council in June to be added to our regional transportation plan. They're not technically in the plan yet due to some air quality requirements that we have to go through, but we think that'll be wrapped up probably into spring, early summer, and then they'll formally be in the plan. The southern leg is going into the plan as a project that would be funded starting in 2027, and then the 36A North segment would be in by 2040, I believe, but that may change. When you put projects in a regional transportation plan, a 20-year plan that far out, you're not actually saying it's actually going to happen in 2040. You're saying that we're putting it in 2040, and as we continue developing the project and we know what the real timeline is going to be, that's when we'll eventually get it to the year when it's actually going to happen. So that date will probably become a little bit more precise, at least, as development of those projects move forward. A couple of things that I'll just go through about these projects. So from the HGAC's perspective, the MPO's perspective, I know that these projects were considered and acted on initially by our policy council back in 2014. That was to start a study process for the two projects. At that time, that approval happened. There was a condition, just to note this, that there was a condition relating to the 36A North piece that was just that it should, the TxDOT, as they develop that project, should make all efforts to avoid adverse impacts to the Katy Prairie Conservancy and lands occupied by them. That was a TPC position, and when that approval back in June happened, that was again part of the approval for that particular leg of the project. But as you guys have seen, we don't have them up, I didn't bring a presentation, but as you guys have seen, I'm sure the study areas for both of those, they're very broad areas. TxDOT has said they're gonna basically look at the entire set of possibilities to find routes for both those projects, and so that's what we're looking forward to. The other thing that I wanted to comment on for this particular project, or these projects, is that when we do a big amendment to our plan like this, and keep in mind, these went into the plan totaling $2.4 billion for these two projects, and that number is going to change over time, but that's the sort of the starting number for those. But when we do big amendments to the regional transportation plan, we go through a public comment process for that. So there were a bunch of amendments that we had under consideration this past spring and summer for this amendment, this set of amendments. And the 36A projects received the most number of comments in that set. So we received, all told, project-specific comments, we received around 75 or so. 25 of those, a full third of those, were relating to 36A. And I think there was only one that was an opposition to it. There were some that were really expressing concern about the environmental impacts, but the vast majority of them, including the one from this coalition, were obviously very supportive. And that influenced the Policy Council, I think, a great deal when they took their decision on that. So that's basically where the projects are right now. They're in the plan, or they're going to be in the plan formally soon. They're approved. That decision's been made. It's just going through the mechanical, essentially the mechanical process of doing the air quality conformity determination for those. But that should, like I said, that should be wrapped up relatively soon. And I'm happy to answer any questions, but I also, Chuck Wemple, the executive director for HGAC, has arrived, and I think he had a few words. He's going to put the project into some context as well.
I'll read his bio right quick.
Great.
All right.
Thanks.
Thanks, sir. Thank you, Chuck. So, or Craig, sorry.
You can take him first.
Yeah. I'm looking at Chuck and, yeah, okay. Thank you for being here, Chuck.
My pleasure, sorry I'm late.
Chuck is the Executive Director of the Houston-Galveston Area Council, where he oversees all programs and services, including transportation planning, community and economic development, public safety, aging services, and workforce development. He has extensive experience in addressing infrastructure, housing, and economic recovery needs following natural disasters and economic downturns. Chuck has also served as chairman of the Executive Directors Council for the Texas Association of Regional Councils. So please help me in welcoming Chuck.
First of all, my apologies. There was a calendaring issue, and I apologize for arriving late, but Craig did a fantastic job of flipping the script and having a great presentation for you. I'll just add a couple of maybe regional context and thinking about the future comments, and then we can love to have conversation with all of you. I know Craig's ready to engage, and so am I. You know, when Craig and I look out across the region and we think about transportation, there's a lot of challenges and a lot of needs, a lot of projects, not near enough funding, right? Even with the additional funding that's set to come out of Washington, there's still not going to be enough. We find ourselves in that situation often with transportation, with workforce, with disaster recovery. There's a lot of money, but it's still not enough to really take care of our region's needs. And so as we look at corridor projects that particularly focus on freight and goods movement, we think those are really high priorities to really make sure our economy stays strong, gets even stronger to where it's at. Things that move freight and goods to markets, it's a little different now than it used to be, right? There's even a lot more localized neighborhood freight delivery. You've probably all seen that recently, a lot more online shopping, a lot more Amazon vans and other things in the neighborhoods. And the future of how that freight gets distributed is yet to be determined, but it's going to be different than it was. And so when you think of a corridor project like 36A, it's important to think of conventional approaches of coastal port moving freight inland or freight coming to the coastal port. But then what happens once it gets inland? Are we looking at a different distribution system? Fulfillment centers are the hot new thing. I know a lot of us have seen those come into our communities. It could be something else a little further down the road too, but being flexible and looking at freight and goods movement and possibly even dedicating part of the system just to freight and goods movement could help with one of our biggest transportation challenges, which is traffic safety. And this is something I work into every presentation that I give these days, because it's been brought to my attention, you know, over the last several years, we've lost about 630 people roughly every year on roads in our region, right? Over 3,000 in the state. Over 600 people lose their lives on our roadways in our region. So traffic safety is incredibly important. We are on schedule to eclipse that. As you all know, traffic is back, and it's bigger than it was before, and it's not as much of a morning and evening peak and valley situation. And accidents are up. And if we stay on track, we're gonna exceed probably 830 deaths this year. So we're gonna go from over 600 to over 800. So we have to do something about traffic safety. And if that means rethinking future projects a bit to improve that safety, that is really worthwhile so we can reduce the loss of life. So we can think about dedicated parts of a corridor perhaps just for freight. Some of those freight motorist encounters are incredibly lethal and very dangerous. Maybe different ways of moving freight around too. Craig and I don't know if you had a chance to talk about this, but one thing that he and I are working on for 2022 is to have a freight and technology summit in the region. What are the new technology opportunities to move freight and goods across the region and beyond and within the region as well too? We kind of get left out of the picture in our region compared to other parts of the country like Phoenix and Dallas and other areas. So it's time for us to step up and look at new options of what that means for us. And so if you think about technology, moving freight and goods, improving safety, that will help position this project and any other project for improved chances of funding in the future, and finance coming down from the federal government as well, because those are incredibly important priorities. Moving people, don't get me wrong, also incredibly important. Lots of congestion. I spent a little time on the 610 parking lot on the way over to this meeting, and so we definitely want to be focusing on reducing congestion, increasing what's called our reliability. Do you know it's going to take you 45 minutes to get to a location this morning, but it actually takes you an hour and a half because of congestion? Those are all really important challenges that Craig and his team and the Transportation Policy Council and others are tackling. But if we rethink our major corridors on the economy, freight and goods movement, improving safety, that will really help our region, and it's going to help change some of the perceptions that are out there about our region as well too. I would like to come out in a few years and say that our region no longer leads to traffic fatalities in the state and the country, for example. I'd love to be able to say that we anticipated a 200% growth in freight traffic and got ahead of it and got innovative ways to still have that happen and not have that become mired down and not see the economic impacts that we have. So just a few closing thoughts to add to that. I don't want to drag out the presentation anymore because I was a little late already. And let's go ahead and turn it over to questions or comments. We'd love to have a conversation. Craig, you want to come back up? You're probably going to get most of it. Thank you all for your attention and time today. And let's go ahead and see what you want to talk about.
You know, we've had a presentation here with our group by the freight shuttle technology, and you just made a reference, and it seems like it could be that could be a connecting kind of philosophy there. So are you all exposed to that? Is that on your radar in terms of a potential technology to utilize to ease or facilitate the movement of freight in the region?
Yes, so the question was, are we looking at freight shuttle and autonomous freight delivery? Yes, that's definitely something that we're interested in exploring more and looking at. It's being talked about in other parts of our region as well too. That freight and goods movement, so we're going to see like 200% or more increase in freight coming our way, and there's a huge shortage of truck drivers, right? And people being able to do that. I mean, the long haul truckers, it is hard to fill those positions, so there has to be a technology solution for it to work. So certainly that's something that's in there. There are other opportunities out there as well too. Craig and I are working with our colleagues in the Phoenix area, Maricopa County. They tend to be a real strong pilot test bed for autonomous freight and other things as well too. So we want to have that summit to not only have that one option you mentioned, but others come in and let's see what we can do in our region. So absolutely. Yes.
Yes, TxDOT's been talking about their REAL program and how they can implement that to help consolidate activities. Have they been working with you all, and can that be integrated to handle all of our freight or address other congestion needs?
Yeah, I know that I sit on one of the committees for the REAL plan. A number of our Transportation Policy Council members is too. I think I'll have Craig handle some of the details on that.
Sure. Yeah, sure. And that project has been moving along, moving more in the background. There haven't been any meetings of, I think they have two policy or two advisory groups, one that's more policy focused and one's more technically focused. Yeah, the short answer to that is yes. A major component of what TxDOT is looking at with that REAL plan is the integration of freight into that concept. And for those who don't really understand or who aren't really familiar with this plan, basically what it is the potential development of a network of special facilities. I mean, right now TxDOT refers to them as managed lanes, but they're intended to be separate from general purpose traffic a little bit, so that they can really focus on more efficient movement of the vehicles that are using those. And so I think that they're envisioning a network within that is really focused on freight movement. And it really is when a grid type network, I mean, built on the existing network, it doesn't quite work out that way, but that's really what they're going for, is a lot of interconnectivity of that infrastructure, so that there can be a lot of options for that movement to happen. And so, yeah, with freight as part of that, there is a complete freight working group that they have on that too. And I believe the next expected meeting of that of one of these advisory groups, the one focused on policy, is in early December, and then they have the one I think that's going to be focused on freight. I think is scheduled right now tentatively for early next year. So I think both of those are in the works again. So yeah, they're engaging. Once we're involved in that. Like Chuck said, he's on one of those. I'm on the other one. Mine hasn't met yet since I've been here in the past 9.5 months. But it's coming. Yeah, it's December, I think. And so once TxDOT finishes with that, because they're essentially a member agency of HGAC. So once they're finished with that, then we'll take it and run through the regional planning process that we have to go through. That involves a lot more public engagement, analysis, evaluation of feasibility, funding sources, things like that. But hopefully we'll find a way to be able to make that work in the region.
I would just add, it's a great opportunity, and a lot of that work actually needs to happen at the Transportation Policy Council at HGAC, with Craig partnering with TxDOT on that. The idea is fantastic, right? It's something that Craig and I fully support. You look at all of it on a project. You don't just think, ooh, this is a traffic congestion project, this is a freight project, this is a whatever other project. You kind of look at it holistically, and that saves time, saves money, makes it more appealing and understandable for the public and everyone else. And I think positions as well for future economic development. Yes?
Morning. So
Good morning.
it seems like historically, when money becomes available with a pretty short trigger, we kind of as a region generally struggle with having projects ready to go.
Yeah.
So now there's a big old bucket of money that's coming from the federal government, and A, how prepared are we, and B, how do we quickly respond to capture some of the opportunity that's going to be available?
Yeah, great question. So I was at a meeting earlier this week, similar question and topic. So thanks, Bruce, for that. One thing that we haven't done as well as a region, and I use this we as all of us, is that we haven't really coordinated our efforts in advance of some major opportunities compared to other regions in Texas and other parts of the country who tend to go through a process of having projects ready for whatever type of funding might come their way and establishing those key priorities up front. And so it's not helpful to have 50 grant applications competing against each other from the same region for the same pot of money, for example, unless there's some way to coordinate a large number of those and make that possible. So are we ready right now? Craig's gonna give a presentation tomorrow at the end of the Transportation Policy Council on this exact topic of what it means for our region. We do need to be thinking now and not waiting as to which projects are the best to advance. Some of the specifics on the funding, and this is where I apologize if some of you aren't familiar with the way some of the federal and state funding works, it can be very restrictive sometimes and not very flexible. And one thing that we're encouraging during the rulemaking coming up is maximum flexibility. I got really concerned in the meeting the other day when someone said, oh yeah, there's gonna be rulemaking and they're gonna create all these new programs and all these new ideas, and I was like, oh no. Not that new ideas and new programs aren't good, but for those of us who have worked through this and churned through this, that means hyper-specific opportunities that are quite limited, and it results in a weird phenomena. Instead of having a great project ready or a series of great projects ready to advance, you have to develop a project to meet the funding need, and that's usually not a great way to go. Oh, here's this bag of money, you can only spend it on purple and blue electric charging stations of a certain size and wattage, and you need something else, but then you have to go after that money, create a whole new project. So that's not a recipe for success for us. And Craig will have more details on what it means for our region tomorrow.
Yeah, I don't have a whole lot to add to that, other than I don't usually do something like this, but hey, tune in to the Transportation Policy Council meeting tomorrow.
It's a new approach for us, so please do.
No, I mean, this bill is technically 4 days old at this point. And so we're really just starting to dig into it, but that's what I'm previewing tomorrow is a little bit of the initial staff developed revenue estimates and some of the identification of pieces that we think will be of a lot of relevance from a transportation perspective to our region. I'll also note, 2/5 to 1/3 of this bill of the revenue is really outside of transportation, and so it's way more than just a transportation bill. And that's really just the part that I'm going to be talking about tomorrow. But Bruce and Chuck, you guys kind of stole my thunder because the very last point, I'm going to steal it for myself now, but the very last point of my presentation tomorrow is basically going to be that we need as a region to start identifying projects and having them ready to go when new funding sources become available. I've worked at agencies in the past where we do exactly that. The project. A grant announcement is made, and all of a sudden we're scrambling to find what we have and kind of codge it into the shape so that it will fit this application, and they don't work, they tend not to work very well. And so, just from a big philosophical level standpoint, the way that we would probably prefer to do our transportation planning with our policy council, with our technical advisory council, all the local governments that participate in HGAC's transportation arena is we're probably not going to say, here's a funding source, tell us what you want to do, tell us what you have for this. But instead, we're going to ask, what do you need? And then we are going to do the best job we can to take the funding sources that we know we have, or these grants that are discretionary funding from the federal government, and try to fit them, and then compete to get those. Rather than try to keep identifying and be responsive. There are more than 40, I think, new grant programs in this bill. At least 15, I think, 18 of those are transportation related. And for us to try to do 18 and try to coordinate the efforts for 18 different grant programs over the next couple of years would be pretty overwhelming. It'll be a lot easier if we just work to identify all the needs in the region, and then we'll work to try to get the funds available, make the funds available.
Which kind of comes back to that encouraging maximum flexibility in the funding, right? The best thing that can happen is, yes, is more money needed? Absolutely. Have that money come to the regions, and then the regional priorities and local needs can be funded through a transparent process, as opposed to trying to shoehorn everything in. Yes, Mayor Garcia, good to see you.
Craig, I would encourage you to consider asking, what do you need and by when? Because some of these become perpetual needs, it appears, and so if you look towards the needs of our region, how do we prioritize those so that we get some solution in our lifetime?
Yeah, no, I think that's a very good point, and that's part of what we're trying to do. We, at my last agency, and something I intend to do here, is we maintained a list of unfunded projects, unfunded needs, you could call them. And frankly, sometimes the need part of that wasn't as strong as it could have been, but we still had that list of projects. And when funding sources became available, we had something to draw from right away that we could go after those. And so that region, when the Recovery Act from 2009 came out, that region was ready to go with shovel-ready projects, and they were incredibly quick to get those. And I think we can pretty, with deliberate effort, we can set that up and have that same thing here. But we're gonna, admittedly, it's gonna be a scramble in the short term to try to stay ahead of these funding sources, so that we're ready to move when they become available.
I would just add, what happens anytime there's a large amount of funding, whether it's disaster recovery or stimulus or otherwise, is there's all this excitement. Oh, all this money is out there, all this money's coming. And then there's this weird holding pattern that happens while the rulemaking is being done and other decisions are being made. And it frustrates people because there's a huge need and there's this anticipation of funding, and then there's this holding pattern The worst thing we can do is go into a holding pattern. We need to be talking now about priorities and getting projects ready, because even if they don't get funded with this next round, if you have a great project ready for funding, we'll help find a way to draw funding towards it over time. Maybe not immediately, but over time. Kind of ties into Bruce's comment. Thank you, Mayor. Good to see you. I want to acknowledge Mayor Garcia and Mayor Rowland are also members of the Houston Galveston Area Council Board. Good to see you both here today. Yes.
Just kind of following on to that, and you're talking about planning to be ready for the slices of the
Yeah.
identified, the way it's funded. But what are some of the things maybe that you've done, or some of the projects that you have queued up, or some of the feedback that you got from your agencies to know, you know, that you already said, okay, we already have this stack right here ready to begin responding when we get to that next step?
Sure. I'll give one example. It's not transportation related, even if you have a new process we have, and then Craig can talk about transportation. I know that Mayor Garcia is familiar with this process. We have a Water Resources Committee that's looking at flood mitigation across our entire region. And one of the best things that came out of Harvey is, for the first time, local governments are working across borders to look at big flood mitigation projects. They realize the flooding doesn't start or stop at the city or county line. So we've actually started a process to where we come together, we set priorities, and we actually have a list right now. It's about almost a $9 billion list outside of Harris County of regional flood mitigation projects that span multiple individuals, and also some very localized urgent need projects in some of our smaller communities. And the nice thing is, it's a list, the projects are ready, and when the funding comes, they've already been prioritized. When the funding comes, these are the ones that go. And so there's a model that we have with Water Resources that might be helpful, correct?
Yeah, and from the transportation perspective, again, without going into a lot of detail about what's in the bill and the way that it's structured, there are going to be increases to what we call formula funds. Those are the money, the funds that come to the region regardless of a project. So we will have available to us roughly a third more federal dollars just through formula increases. And I think the way that we're probably going to, because we frankly don't have a long unfunded list in the transportation sector. We haven't maintained one. That's kind of what I was alluding to. It's something we need to start doing, and we will. And you know, the development of it's going to take some time. But for the formula funds, I think what we'll probably do is try to accelerate projects and make projects that are currently programmed later in our plans to happen sooner, and try to fill the gaps that way. Another possibility that I've started talking with some of the local agencies about is essentially swapping local for federal dollars on certain types of projects. So that's another way to do that. And then for those competitive grants that are coming out, the way that we're going to have to do that, unfortunately, is start now to identify projects. We're going to know what those grants are. My team is looking into what each of those categories is going to be, and we'll be reaching out to try to have the local governments in the region identify potential needs that align with those projects, and then we'll start developing those. And we're anticipating that we'll get some kind of indications from the U.S. Department of Transportation relatively soon as to which are going to be the ones that start moving first. And once we know what those are, then we'll start focusing in on those so that we can be developing those. But it'll take us, I would bet we're going to be probably 4 to 6 months before these grant programs are starting, really. And so that's the time frame we have to start developing these lists to have competitive projects for these when these application processes start.
Craig, do you mind giving them, when you say accelerate the funding, do you want to give an idea on how much faster things would happen if you accelerate?
Well, yeah, I mean, basically what I'm talking about is taking projects that, you know, right now might be a project that's programmed to happen in 2025, and some local governments, not everyone, but some local governments are actually working on those, and with a little bit of additional resource, they would be able to make them happen maybe in 2022 or 2023. And that's what we're talking about. When I say accelerate, that's what I mean by those. So not try to get projects done faster, although that's also fine. But really, what we're trying to do is to get projects let or obligated so that the funds are considered spent by the federal government. And once they're obligated, then that usually means that they're under contract and there's work happening, they're progressing and advancing. And so that's really what that side of accelerating means. And then the idea of swapping projects is, that idea of taking a project that, say, I'll choose a county that's not here, Chambers County, because I don't want to call out or put any pressure, undue pressure on anyone in the room.
I'm
but-
just doing one more quick look around the room.
But say take a project that Chambers County is planning to use local dollars to do in the next couple of years, and if there are certain characteristics for those projects, instead switch it to federal funds so that we can use those federal dollars and free up the local dollars for what they can identify as new priorities as well. So that's another way that we can kind of absorb some of these.
But one challenge that comes with accelerating projects, and one reason why it's really important to have some stuff lined out in advance, is the faster you can have a project ready to be approved and start going out for bid and various things, the sooner you get in the supply chain line and the labor line. And that's going to be a big issue not only in our region, but across the country, because this is a national effort. So labor issues, supply chain issues are going to come into play with all this too, which is why we have to be pre-positioned as much as we can.
Yeah, and I mean, just to add to that as well, and this, it's unfortunate as well, but from our perspective, the other thing that we'll expect to see is not just those shortages, but those shortages indicate what follows the shortage is inflation.
Yep.
And in the Las Vegas region where I came from, when we passed a local government options gas tax, and suddenly our revenues for road projects went up significantly, we saw about a 15 to 20% inflation of costs as well. So, we're getting about 30% more money. This is something that's going to be happening all over the country.
Yep.
It may not feel like we're getting 30% more projects or work out of that.
Some of the elements we've incorporated in the real plan are things like safety, economic impact, and development, and those kind of things. And in the last 10 months, we have a brand new one, and I'm curious, what do you think the energy transition is going to do to our planning?
To the real plan specifically?
Well, not specifically, but to our planning overall. If we're going to suddenly bring a lot of EVs into the area, it'll change the way we have to plan our infrastructure some, because we have to accommodate charging facilities. It's not like they're going to go to the gas station and get their vehicle topped off or anything now. So it's going to change a lot of things.
I will admit to a bit of a cultural, difference, having come from a non-oil producing, oil energy economy part of the country to coming here. But believe it or not, as I was leaving Las Vegas, one of the major localized, regional gas outlets, they were called Terribles, but Terrible Herbs, sorry, the nickname, the Wild West, right? But
Wasn't judgment on your part.
right, no, wasn't my nickname.
Yeah.
However, okay, set that aside. They were starting to install pretty level 2 charging stations at every single one of their gas stations, and some of the higher profile ones were, or some of the higher traffic ones were getting more than that, and they were doing that before there were resources like this bill that were becoming available for that. And so, I wouldn't automatically assume that charging is not going to go to gas stations, although as another part of my background, I've been on the Transportation Research Board's Alternative Fuels Committee for about 15 years now. And we look at what charging infrastructure needs to look like. And so it turns out that charging stations at gas stations tend not to increase charging, but they increase uptake of electric alternative fuel vehicles. Because people don't want to stop and charge at a gas station and spend half an hour there. But knowing that it's there, they're more comfortable having that, and they're less concerned with range anxiety. So the actual charging happens at homes and at workplaces. And that's really where a lot of the infrastructure, and then along highways. And that's where a lot of the infrastructure from this new bill is probably going to end up going towards.
I would just quickly add though that there's a lot to consider with that. Generating capacity for electricity in the first place, you know, in our region, we gotta look at that. And then, you know, so lots of growth, more rooftops, more electricity to rooftops, lots of cars, more electricity to cars. We've gotta be looking at generating capacity for our region as well too, to really make that transition. And that takes time to get that put into place. And so we can't glance away from that future. We have to find a way to lean into it in the way that makes sense for us.
One more question.
I'm Rob Fishman. We're a study team working on 36A South and North, and we're working on the draft purpose of needs. And some of the discussion here has been very enlightening with regards to the safety component. This corridor is a big freight corridor, and we're having a lot of discussions with our stakeholders and with TxDOT on the future of transportation and what this corridor is going to look like. So I'm not really sure if this is a question, but maybe an ask. We'd really like to sit down and kind of refine our draft purpose and need, because originally this came out with the plan to move trucks outside the urban core and kind of split those traffic and then hit the real program. We have a meeting next week to talk with them about the west side of the real program, how we can make into it. So I think as all these planning efforts, working with the cities and stuff, how we can describe what this corridor is going to look like, both now, 10 years from now, 20, 30 years, and be able to basically have some adaptability into the future to if we all go electric or if they want to put other types of facilities in there. I think that this plan will go out there. So,
Yeah, I think, for what it's worth, I think that kind of forward looking is very important. I think part of what is, you know, what makes that difficult, I'm sure you're feeling this, is, you know, this is perhaps the most fluid time in describing the future of transportation in decades. You know, I mean, if you looked at the transportation system in the 50s and you thought about what it would be in the 70s, it was essentially the same. And if the 70s to the 90s, and it was essentially the same. I mean, yeah, there were always ideas out there for, you know, that there would be self-driving cars or flying, you know, motorcycles or whatever. But, you know, they were basically the same. And we're at a point now where that is not the case anymore. And what the infrastructure needs to look like, what a highway or even a local street needs to look like in 10, 15, 20 years from now compared to what we would build typically now, there's a lot of uncertainty there. And so the real challenge is not really trying to predict this is exactly what the future is going to be, but to build in that adaptability or that sort of resiliency into the design, so that as we reach certain decision points or certain changes to the transportation system, that the project becomes adaptable to those as it happens.
Yeah, because I know there's a project that's coming up in I think it's Austin, San Antonio area, where it's a pilot project where there's a confined freight corridor, but they have an airspace component to it. They want to have it to run drones through it. So that they're looking at that. So I think we just need to keep our eyes wide open in the future.
Yep, exactly right.
Thank y'all, gentlemen. Really appreciate it. I think most of us probably, looking around the room, remember the Jetsons and thought that was really
Yeah.
Probably not everybody here.
Yeah, but well, it's amazing how that puts an age on people, isn't it?
Thank you for being here. We really
Thank you very
appreciate
much.
it. Just a
Thank you.
small gift for
Thank you.
appreciation. So
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all for your attention this morning.
Thanks, everyone.
Conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So I couldn't help but, when you're talking about some of this, thinking about EVs.
Yeah.
And I saw a cartoon the other day of somebody with a carrier, luggage carrier on the back of their EV to carry their generator.
No, when Tesla was first starting, there were people that tried that idea out back when they had the real sports car versions, and there were a few of them driving around. You can Google it. You can find these pictures of people driving around with a generator on a trailer behind this, this $100,000 plus roadster sports car with this big clunky yellow generator hauling around behind it. Newton's Law, kind of, you know, but
Right.
kind of being ignored.
All right, thank you, gentlemen, really
All right,
appreciate it.
thank you all very much.
Just to wrap up right quick, I hope y'all have noticed the slides up here that talk about
you guys tomorrow.
who the board members are right now, who the current officers are, our vision and mission statement. The sole purpose of 36A was to do just what y'all have been talking about here, is plan ahead, get the vision to TxDOT. We would not be in the regional transportation plan, I do not believe, without 36A coalition coming together to try to encourage that. So it's been government officials, engineering, you know, private firms, individuals. Everyone's welcome to join. If you're not a member, we would welcome you to join that. We've been around since somewhere around 2011. I don't remember the exact date. Jim might have. He's left the building, I think. So, but anyway, the sole purpose was to plan ahead to try to get this. And it's not just trucking. It's mobility in general. Hurricane evacuation was the critical one, because all of us that have driven 36 for years know how congested that can be, how bad it can be. Roger's experiencing it in the middle of Brazoria right now.
I had a question about that too.
You need to get a Brazoria coalition together. But I'll try to answer your question if you want, but I might let Mike do that, I don't know.
Well, I'm just curious, with
Okay.
us being on the main corridor between the port, inland, and tremendous amount of truck traffic.
Yes, sir.
Freight And vehicle traffic.
Vehicle travel, yes,
Is
sir.
the bypass still in play, or is it dead?
I think I don't think there's anybody here from TxDOT right now. Honestly, I believe, HGAC folks might be able to help you with that transportation, but it is Houston Galveston Area Council. It is Brazoria County, but I think Maria Aponte is the new regional manager there, or the new Brazoria area engineer, thank you.
Hankinson,
Right,
yes.
whatever, yeah. So, and I did ask Phyllis to add you onto the TxDOT update for locally, so give you an opportunity to get in there and talk to her. I think that's where you're gonna have to address that and see if they will put it back in their regional transportation plan.
I know, looking to the future with the 36 coming down, it would be
Oh, yeah.
a tremendous help to the city.
And my understanding, and I don't know that for certain, but I thought they were gonna do an overpass in West Columbia where 35 and 36 cross. You don't know? That it's not?
I don't have the information.
Yeah, I can look in, I
Okay.
can contact TxDOT and find out.
Somewhere, but
We don't,
because that hurricane evacuation was probably the biggest congestion.
It's gonna become a bottleneck, look to the future. do
Right.
something about it.
I do want to make one comment with regards to the volume. When they first began introducing the 2050 plan, which was Bruce, 4 years ago, something like that, we found out that we can quadruple our GDP in the state of Texas by 2050.
Yeah.
Now, when you think about that, the last projection I saw for freight and international business together was about a 15% per annum growth rate. It's higher than that now. So the volume is coming because consumers are coming, the population is growing, and Texas is gonna become the centroid for most economic activity in the next 15 to 20 years. Because it used to be over Atlanta for the whole country, and it's been moving west for decades, and it's gonna settle down into what we'll call a golden triangle between Austin, Dallas, and Houston. That's the current projection. So we're gonna be dealing with mega regions of volume, not local regions of volume in the future. And
Well-
it's really hard to plan for that kind of growth, because there's not enough ports or roads or highways or bridges or trains yet to be able to handle that kind of volume. So I think the point Craig made earlier is very important. Transportation's gotta look different,
yeah.
because you can't do it by just building roads anymore.
Well, every roadway that gets built, all of a sudden gets overwhelmed with
Yep.
traffic. It just continues on. If you look at Beltway and then the new one connector to from Crab River Road to 290, that has got to be a traffic nightmare. And it used to flow, so.
I think what you're gonna eventually see is it's capacity utilization, and there's a lot of utilization that's not happening between midnight and 6 AM.
That's
Oh.
right.
And I think eventually what you're gonna see, we're not there yet, and we're probably a ways away from it, but you can't build capacity to get yourself out of the situation you're in. There's not, I mean, we're in Texas and we're big, but we ain't that big. And you're gonna see that freight try to move tonight because that's gonna be the cheapest move. It's not trying to, so when you talk about things like the bypass, well, if freight's gonna move between 12 and 6, you don't need the bypass. Cause it's just gonna zoom right down the interstate. So I think, you know, if you listen to the demographers, you know, today we have rush hour in the morning, rush hour in the afternoon. We have an aging population.
Yep.
We're gonna have rush hour from morning to evening, and it's
Yep.
really gonna force that freight to move at night. So we've gotta change our
The
assets,
Disneyland effect is not-
to be able to load and unload at nighttime. We've gotta look at our infrastructure and say, what does it need to look like if we're moving freight at night? But eventually we're gonna have to get there because that's where the capacity is gonna be. So I think that's part of the answer to the bypass is, do we really need it by the time it's built? Because that's not when freight's gonna move. And today, there's not enough volume to substantiate building it. And 15 years from now, that's not how freight's gonna move, so.
Well, I mean, that's gonna go back to legislation because right now, TxDOT, the permitting process for any transportation is daylight only. You can't
Right.
do it at night, so that has to change as well,
Right,
so.
there's a lot of, you know,
Yeah, there's a lot of
the HED that doesn't want the truck to pull into the neighborhood
Right.
at nighttime to unload the truck at night. Well, you know, we're gonna have to look at some of these local
Right.
rules and really think about, do they make sense when freight's gonna have to move at night? What are you gonna do, pull the truck there, park it, and not offload it until the morning?
So Chuck alluded to Transportation Summit coming up, maybe,
Yep.
and I
Yep.
think that's a great opportunity. I think 36A would love to participate in that as
Right.
well. We do a summit typically every August, summertime somewhere. So please stay in touch. Let's
Absolutely.
try to do something there. I
Absolutely.
think that would be a great opportunity.